This is an interview with Reginald Thayer at the Hampton Inn. That's bad, isn't it? In Tarrytown, New York. It is February 6, 2003, approximately 10:15 a.m. The interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Yes, it's Reginald Holden, Holden, Thayer, Jr., born in Yonkers, New York in 1921.
Okay. Prior to entering military service, what was your educational background?
I was in my third year at Columbia University.
When you heard about Pearl Harbor, where were you, and what was your reaction to
Well, I was at home in Yonkers doing a homework assignment in calculus, a subject which I wasn't doing very well in, and I got a phone call from an uncle saying the Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor. And there had been talk in the papers and on the radio about friction with Japan, possible war, but I never thought it was going to happen. And when I did think about it, I figured we'd beat them in about a month. And so the next day it was a Monday, the next day I went down to college, Columbia, and the dean called all the students in, and he said, we're probably going to go to war. Congress will be declaring war today or tomorrow. And he said, don't volunteer. Wait till you're drafted. And when the meeting broke up, I went to his office, and he said, what do you want? And I said, I want a leave of absence to join the Army. And he said, did you hear me at the meeting this morning? And I said, yes. He said, I guess you really want to go, don't you? And I said, yes. He said, all right, I'll give you a leave of absence. So I went downtown and started the enlistment process.
And what branch did you select?
Well, in those days, we didn't have a separate Air Force. It was the Army. I applied for aviation cadet training. I wanted to be a pilot. Everybody who went in the Air Force wanted to be another fighter pilot, like Eddie Rickenbacker. And I went down to Montgomery, Alabama, Maxwell Field for pre-flight training. And then I went on to primary flight training in Florida, and I was flunked out of it because I was pretty erratic in my flying. And then I went into Bombardier training and got my commission as a Bombardier, second lieutenant, and that was in December 1942. And then I was put with a B-17 crew, and we trained for overseas duty. And we went to North Africa by way of South America. And we picked up a monkey on the way as a pet. And while we were flying over the Atlas Mountains in Africa, we had to go on oxygen. And the monkey started to get sick. So I took my oxygen mask off and put it over his face and turned the oxygen on, and we shared the mask back and forth. And we both survived.
Did you keep the plane you went over in, or
no? They took it away from us and gave us another one. I don't know the reason for that.
The next one you received, was it a painted one, or was it the silver?
No, that was before the days of the unpainted
That's
planes.
Right. Okay. Did you name your plane?
Yes, Exterminator.
Who named it, or was it?
I think it was a consensus decision.
Consensus. Did you nose hard the plane at all?
Oh yeah, we had all kinds of stuff written, all our names. I forget. There was some kind of a picture. I forget what it was.
Did you decorate your jackets at all?
I didn't decorate mine. Most of the fellows did. My jacket right now is on display in the West Point Museum.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Wouldn't fit me if I had it. Okay, why don't you tell us your
experiences from the time you reached North Africa and into Italy.
Well, let me start by telling you that I like to think it was typical. In other words, I was not involved in heroics. I just did my job day after day. The one thing that was different about my career than most was that I flew more missions voluntarily than I was required to fly. But I never got wounded, never got shot down. Fellows I flew with got wounded from time to time. The plane got hit quite often, but I was never scratched. Our first mission was to bomb some docks at Messina, which is a port on Sicily, the closest point to Italy. And the idea was to bomb the docks because we didn't know at the time, but they were going to invade Sicily a couple of weeks later. And they wanted to destroy the docks so the Germans couldn't bring in reinforcements when we invaded Sicily. And then a couple of weeks later, our group commander told us we were getting a day off, and he said, tomorrow, he said, you're going to have a very unusual mission. And he said, I can't tell you what it is right now. And we speculated. Some people thought it was going to be this target or that target. Somebody said, I wonder if it's going to be Rome. They said, no, we wouldn't bomb Rome because the Vatican is there. And the next day, we went to briefing, and the group commander, Colonel Rainey, he said, I want to introduce you to General Doolittle. And he conducted the briefing, Doolittle did. He said, we're going to bomb Rome today. We're going to bomb the railroad marshalling yards. Rome had been off limits because they didn't want to damage all the religious buildings. And we were given maps and target photos with all the religious buildings outlined in bold white letters that must on no account be damaged. And we sent over about 500 airplanes, and I think one bomb hit one religious building. It was a very accurate mission. And about 3 days later, Mussolini was deposed. There was a big furor, just a big uprising.
Did you ever go into the Poresti oil fields?
No, I didn't. I flew missions in, let's see, Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, Austria, and Greece. I was in the first mission over France from Germany, and the first mission from Africa, and the first mission over Germany from North Africa. In those days, we were flying maybe 200 or 300 planes in a mission. A year or two later, when I was flying out of England, we'd send 1,000 bombers over, or even more sometimes.
Could you tell us about some of the raids that stand out most in your mind when you were in
Yes,
the
I
15th?
think two of them stand out most. Salerno was the Salerno beachhead invasion took place about September 3rd, 1943. And for a while it was nip and tuck. The Germans almost pushed the Americans off the beach. And just about when the Americans started to advance from the beachhead, we were told to go on a mission to bomb some roads in the mountains just inland from the beachhead. And we were told it was so important that we were going to fly straight to the target. Usually you fly to some point away from the target and do a sudden turn so the Germans didn't know where you were headed. And they told us we'd be flying, we normally flew at 20 to 25,000 feet. On this day they said you're going to go in at 15,000 feet because the Germans are retreating, and we don't think they have their anti-aircraft guns set up. They'll be towing them in their trucks or something. So we went in at 15,000 feet. They also told us we were flying over the U.S. Navy at the beachhead area. They said, but don't worry, they know you're coming, they won't shoot at you. Well, it turned out the Navy did shoot at us, but luckily they missed. And then since we were going into 15,000 feet, and the road we were supposed to bomb was one of those winding roads in a mountain, that was maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet above sea level. So we were maybe 12,000 feet above the target. And the Germans did have their guns ready for us, and they gave us a tremendous barrage of flak. And one of my gunners had his toe shot off, and another one had his leg, a serious wound in his leg. And so after we dropped the bombs, instead of going back to North Africa, we landed at an airfield in Catania, Sicily, to get medical attention for him. Actually, he had to have his leg amputated. That finished his military career. And then when we were getting ready to fly back to North Africa, we got refueled the plane, and the ground crew that inspected our plane said that a German 88 millimeter anti-aircraft projectile had gone through the main spar of the wing and out the top of the wing without exploding. It was a dud. And they said, you can't fly this plane or the wing will fall off. So we hitchhiked back to North Africa and then resumed our bombing missions. Now, the second one that stands out in my mind was it was an aircraft manufacturing plant in Austria near Wiener Neustadt, which I guess in German means New Vienna, the new city of Vienna, I believe. And there was tremendous anti-aircraft fire and fighter plane opposition, and a lot of people were wounded. You know, all the planes were damaged. A number of planes were shot down. And my recollection is we hit the target. I'll have to admit, we didn't always hit our targets. You hear about the Norden bomb site being very accurate. You can drop a bomb in a pickle barrel from 5 miles. It didn't always work out that way, but I believe that was a fairly good mission.
And there was my next question, if you had a bomb site. Some
Yes.
did not. Okay.
Well, and when I was flying my first 50 missions, every airplane had a bomb site. In the very beginning, every bombardier used the bomb site. So, and some were accurate and some weren't. So the formation would tend to spread. Some bombardiers would be off to the right and some to the left. And shortly after I started flying missions, they started a new system which became common in England and the 15th Air Force also. The lead bombardier of each squadron would work the bomb site. And the others sitting behind him would watch his plane. And when his bomb dropped, they dropped theirs. Which meant that if he was accurate, they were all accurate. And if he was not accurate, they were all inaccurate. But I think on balance, it produced better results. Theoretically, they put the good bombardiers in the lead plane. And I think I flew 21 in the lead plane of the squadron or the group out of my first 50. And when I was in the 8th Air Force in England, I flew 29 missions, and maybe 10 or 12 of those were in the lead plane.
Did you wear your flak jacket, or did you have it under you?
I didn't have them at first. I was about halfway through my first 50 missions when they brought flak jackets in. And the first time I tried it, every time I leaned over the bomb site, the jacket came up in front of my face. And it was very heavy, not like these jackets they have now, made of Kevlar. So I would sit on it, and it was shaped like a catcher's pad in baseball, with a little tongue that goes down between his legs. Well, I sat on that thing and pulled that tongue off to protect me, and I never got hit.
Okay. So you flew 50 missions while you were in North Africa and
Yes.
Italy.
Yes.
Then where did you go?
Well, then I came home, and I was sent to instructor training school in Midland, Texas. And then I got pretty good grades in that, and they sent me to actually the same air base, Bomber Pilot Approach School. I was supposed to teach pilots how to work with the Bombardier in conjunction with the autopilot. In the very beginning, we flew maybe half of our missions, we didn't use the autopilot. The autopilot was a device that the bomb sight would send a signal to the pilot how to turn, right or left. And before we used the autopilot, the pilot just had a little needle. And the needle would move on signals from the bomb sight, and he'd turn right or left. And so I was teaching pilots how to work with the Bombardier when the autopilot was on a bomb run. And I found it very boring. And I applied for return to combat. There was a lot of stories in the paper about, this was the spring of 1944, about the invasion of France. Nobody knew when it was going to be or where they were going to land. And I applied for combat training, and I was turned down. And I wasn't enjoying being an instructor. So I wrote a letter to Hap Arnold, the general in charge, the highest ranking general in the Army Air Forces in those days. And I said, I think I gave you a copy of that letter.
Yes.
And I told him that I'd like to go to combat in B-17s flying out of England. I said, I forget what I said in the letter, but I wanted to be there when they were having the invasion of Europe so I could help support it. And I got back a letter from Lieutenant General Kuter, K-U-T-E-R, saying you will get the assignment you desire on or about June 1st. And I thought, this was maybe April or May when I wrote that letter. And I thought that was great. Well, June 1st came along and I was still there. June 6th was D-Day, and I still didn't receive orders. And then at that point I had been transferred to a base in New Mexico where I was teaching pilots how to work with the autopilot and the bomb sight. So I went to my squadron commander and I showed him this letter. The copy of the letter I wrote and the reply I got, and I said, look, they didn't keep their promise. They said they're going to send me over there around June 1st. What do I do? And he said, well, write another letter. But he said, for Christ's sake, type it. Don't write it in longhand. So I got a whack lieutenant to type it for me, and I sent off. The first letter I dropped in a mailbox on a street corner. And this one was sent through channel. No, I think I mailed this one. I don't recall. I guess I mailed it also. And then a month or two later, I got orders to go to England. I got on a big convoy and went to England and flew 29 more missions.
Did you go in as a replacement crew member? Or
Yes.
Did you fly with the same crew when
No.
you were there? Or
No, it was a different crew almost every day. I fly 2 or 3 missions with one crew and then 2 or 3 with another.
Did you stay in the same bomb group, or did you?
No, in England it was always a one-bomb group. Same squadron, same group.
Okay. What squadron and group were you with in England?
I was in a 368th Bomb Squadron and a 306th Bomb Group.
Okay. What were some of your missions while you were in England?
Well, I've got a list of them here. We hit some of the big-name cities and some that people never heard of. The one that stands out in my mind was in December, the Battle of Bulge started around December 16th, 1944, and it was very bad weather over Europe. It was about 10 or 15 days where we didn't fly any missions because the weather was so bad. And they had radar bombing by that time, but that was very inaccurate, not like today's bombing. And radar bombing, the operator of the radar could see a city as a blob of a different color on the radar scope, but he couldn't pick out a factory or a railroad yard. And it was very inaccurate, so we didn't do any flying for 10 or 15 days. And then the weather opened up on December 24th, Christmas Eve, and we sent out what might have been the biggest air raid of World War II out of England, maybe between 1,000 and 2,000 bombers and hundreds of fighter escorts. And our target that day was, we didn't go right up near the Battle of the Bulge. It was a bridge or a railroad yard in a little city called Giessen, Giesen, a place nobody's ever heard of. And that night we came back, and it was terrible weather over England when we got back, which is often the case. And we couldn't find our airfield, even though we had an experienced crew. So we landed at another airfield. There turned out to be a fighter pilot base. And we spent the night there and flew back to our base on Christmas Day, the next day. And about that time, the tide started to turn in the Battle of the Bulge.
Did you ever fly any raids into Berlin?
No, I was on a mission to Berlin, which was recalled shortly after we took off because of bad weather. That was supposed to be one of the toughest targets.
Yeah. Did your plane were you ever on a plane that was severely damaged?
Yes, quite often.
Mhm.
So it wasn't unusual to come back on 3 engines instead of 4, occasionally on 2. But I was lucky, I always got back.
Where were you when you heard about President Roosevelt passing away?
I was in England.
What was your reaction to that?
Well, it's funny thing. My father was a staunch Republican, and he didn't think Roosevelt was any good, and some of that rubbed off on me. But so I didn't shed any tears. I wasn't happy, but when I look back on it, he was one of our greatest presidents. The way he rallied our country.
Okay. Did you ever join any veterans groups after the war?
I briefly joined an American Legion post that was formed by some World War I aviators. And they had a pretty good rule. They said, no parades and no uniforms. And that appealed to me. And they would meet in New York City. And they usually get a famous guest speaker, like an Air Force general. One time they got Stuart Symington, the first Air Force secretary. And then I dropped out of that because, I guess I dropped out of that because I was recalled for the Korean War. And I never rejoined the American Legion post. I don't know. I never got into being a full-time veteran, joining organizations.
What did you do during the Korean War period?
I was put on a B-29 bomber crew, supposed to go to Korea, and the very last minute they took 1/3 of us off and made us instructors. And I was sent to Sacramento, California, Mather Air Force Base, and I taught aviation cadets how to bomb, and I taught some navigation, although I was not a rated navigator, but I did some navigation instruction also in the Korean War.
Did you ever or what were some of the decorations you received while you were in service?
I got the European, African, Middle East battle ribbon, whatever they call it, with 6 battle stars. They designate certain phases of the war as battles, like the Battle of I don't know what they were, the crossing of the Rhine, maybe, or something. And I got the Air Medal with 13 oak leaf clusters. They would give an Air Medal for 5 missions, and oak leaf cluster that was represented another Air Medal for the next 5 missions. And so when I had 79 missions, that was enough for the Air Medal and 14 oak leaf clusters. I never got the 14th for some reason. And toward the end of my bombing career in England, I was told that I was being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. And they told me to fill out a form. And I said, well, I'm not going to fill out the form. That's applying for a medal, and I don't think I want to apply for a medal. If you want to give me a medal, I'll be happy to have it. They said, okay, you flew so many missions, we'll put the recommendation in. And shortly after that, the war ended, and I flew home. The war in Germany ended, and I flew home and forgot about the medal. Well, around 1995, I was interviewed by a newspaper reporter, and just similar to this interview, asking me about my wartime experiences. And he asked the same question you had just asked, what medals did you get? And I told him I got the Air Medal with 13 oak leaf clusters. I got the Victory Medal. I said, I didn't get the Good Conduct Medal. And he said, did you ever get the Distinguished Flying Cross? I said, no, but I was told I was recommended for it. And he said, well, that doesn't seem right. I said, well, that's the way it goes. And I forgot about it. Well, about a year later, I got a phone call from this reporter. He had contacted the Air Force, and they checked their records, and lo and behold, they gave me the Distinguished Flying Cross around 1995. It was quite a thrill to get it.
Yes, I imagine it was.
I have a newspaper article about that if you want it later.
I was reading an article you gave us. It called you a statistical aberration. Why was that?
Well, I guess because I flew so many missions without getting shot down.
Okay. Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Yes. When I went back to Columbia after the war,
Mm-hmm.
I finished 2 more years there and got my degree.
Did you happen to make use of the 5220 Club at all?
No, I didn't.
Never did.
But I had jobs. I had
Yeah.
a meal job where I worked in the cafeteria, got free meals, and I got some other part-time job. I worked in the candy store, and I think we were getting $50 a month from the government while we were in college, plus tuition and room. So it was great. I had no problem financing my last 2 years. I lived in the dormitories. First 2 years, I commuted from Yonkers on the subway and a trolley car.
Did you ever find any problems with getting back to being a student?
No, and in fact, most of the veterans who returned were much better students. I was a very poor student before the war, and I never made Phi Beta Kappa or anything, but I was a good student after the war.
Did you do better in calculus?
No, I switched. I took calculus because it was a pre-engineering course,
Uh-huh.
and I had learned that I was not cut out to be an engineer, so I switched to liberal arts.
Uh-huh. Did you ever see many USO shows while you were?
Yes. Yeah, we enjoyed those. I remember seeing Humphrey Bogart, Bob Hope came over. We really enjoyed them.
Do you ever have, a lot of 8th Air Force veterans have told us, do you ever have any encounters with Jimmy Stewart at all?
No,
You never.
no, but I'm a great admirer of his.
Mhm. Okay. Do you have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
You're welcome.
Very good interview.
You're out in there? Okay. And is that plane named, or?
I forget the name of that plane.
Okay.
It was just before takeoff on a mission to bomb some submarine pens in the harbor of Toulon, France.
Okay.
And I'm right there, I'm a Bombardier. This man here is the group commander,
May I ask you?
Colonel Harkos. This is the co-pilot John Drake, navigator Gordon Ruberg. This was not my regular crew, but Ruberg was my regular navigator in the first 50 missions. Does that
Okay.
take care of it?
Great, thank you.
I don't know how that